And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jerry here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 53. Well, can you believe it? January is almost over as you're listening to this episode. Tomorrow is February, and I can't really believe we've already passed the first month of the year. It always feels like it's gone really quick. I think that most of the years, January seems to go pretty quickly because we're either on holidays or we're working away at our goals. We're working away at things that we've been wanting to do for quite some time and things that we've been planning in the year before, and we sort of get straight into those in the new year. How are you guys going with goals? How are you going with working towards things that you'd set yourself for this year? I know for myself, I've been pretty busy over the past couple of weeks, been working hard and working away at those goals that I set for myself at the start of the year. I know I talked about having more sort of lifestyle goals and having things and having ideas of the person who I would like to become. And I think I've been working pretty well towards that. If you've been keeping up to date with me over on Instagram or the other social medias, you would have seen that I'm not very active on my personal account at the moment. I've been spending a lot of time in my business account, and that's obviously for strategic reasons, and I spoke about that before, but I've been finding that has been very, very beneficial to spend a lot of time there, and I'm posting a lot more and making sure that people know who's behind the brand, who it is involved in that photography, who it is actually going to be turning up and taking their photos. I think that's very important to build rapport with your clients, and I think one of those big ways is really turning up on social media, especially in this day and age where people are often removed and the only time that they may see you is on social media, especially if you're in any product-based industry. They won't know who's behind that brand. So I think it's important to be turning up on social media, and that's been something that I've been really trying to do this month, and I think I've been really achieving those goals that I'd really set myself. It wasn't to gain so many followers, it was to try and connect with the ones I've already got. And I think that's a really crucial distinction because a lot of us try and chase new followers, and I think one of the things that can do is deter the followers you've already got. I think we should be maintaining the audience that we already have. We already have people who are interested in our work, and we should be trying to nurture them as much as possible, trying to keep them up to date with what it is we are doing and make sure that they feel like they're a part of a community. Make sure that they feel like this is something that they're involved with and that you're not taking them back to the start every single time you talk to them or treating them like they're not someone who knows you, treating them like a friend, treating them like someone who's been there for a long time because they have been on the journey with you. They have been going through your whole career with you and really making sure they feel like they are a part of that journey. And so that has been always the goal for me on there, and trying to make sure that I'm connecting with the people who have decided to follow me already. And I think that then attracts other people. I think that attracts a lot of different people in their circles as well. They're more likely to share it around, as we spoke about in last week's episode, when you're creating that environment that people really want to be a part of. So that has been one of my big things for the start of this year. Speaking of another one of my big goals, I'm actually starting a new podcast in a couple of weeks. Now, this is very new, something that has been in the works for quite some time, but we decided that we're going to launch it in a couple of weeks. My fiance Emily and I are launching a new podcast all about wedding planning. So this is a little bit different to what I speak about on this podcast, but I think it's still going to be very beneficial all the same, albeit to a different audience. As you guys know, I've been planning my own wedding over the past 9 months, and that has been a very rewarding process. I think I've been really enjoying it, and Emily has been as well. And so we really wanted to give back. We really wanted to give pieces of information to other people who are just starting out on that journey, who are in the same boat as we were 9 months ago and not really knowing how to plan for a wedding, how to do something that you haven't had much experience with before. I know at the point when I got engaged, I'd never been to a wedding. So it was important for me to sort of learn off other different people. And if I can try and provide that information to other people, I think that's really helpful. And it's going to be something that we really both enjoy. So we're going to be moving into that. It's a little bit of a change, but it's a new thing. And it's one of the goals that I had for this year was to try to help other people as much as I possibly could. And I think sharing that wisdom with other people is going to be really helpful. And it's going to be a very rewarding thing because, I think it's great to give back. I think it's great to help other people where you can. And especially if it's something that you're passionate about speaking on. I've always been passionate about photography, but I've never really made anything speaking about photography because I don't think that I really want to sit down each week and make a podcast on photography. That's never something that I really wanted to do. I never wanted to talk about the technical side of photography. Something that much more interested me was the side of business and the side of actually running a small business. That's why I made this podcast, because that was something that really interested me and something that I did struggle with genuinely in the start. And I didn't find a lot of people out there who had podcasts from that ground up perspective of when they first started. So I really wanted to be able to contribute to that space. And I think in the same way, starting a different podcast on something else that I'm just as equally interested in and equally have skills in that area. I think that's very important. And I do come at that from a couple of different perspectives as someone who works in the wedding industry, but also someone who is getting married in a few months. So I think that's going to be a very interesting endeavor. If you guys are interested, I'll leave a link to our Instagram page in the description of this podcast. As I said, it's not launching for a couple of weeks, but if you're interested, all the information will be over on Instagram. We'll be posting in there in the lead up to the launch date. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That really leads into what today's episode is all about, because in today's episode, I really want to speak about how we can get creative ideas and how we can draw inspiration from a bunch of different places. I got asked by a mate a couple of weeks ago where I get the ideas for my podcast from. And to be honest, it was a question I had to really think about, because there's no really one place that I get ideas for the podcast from. I'm not someone who consumes other people's podcasts and uses ideas that I think are good. I think that can become a bit toxic. So I've always, when I first started the podcast, it was something for me, to be honest. I really wanted to make a podcast for the type of person who I was a year ago as someone starting a small business. So I was kind of always speaking to myself. I always knew that there'd be an audience there because I was interested in it. You know, if there's an audience of one, you can have an audience of heaps of people. So at least there is an audience for it. And I knew if I could be interested in it, then other people would be as well. So I was really scratching my own itch in that way of making a podcast about something that I knew I was interested in and something that I knew I had information that I would love to give to myself a year ago. So each episode on this podcast has always been something that I've either been struggling with in business at the moment, or it's been something that I have overcome and have learned something in, and I think other people can gain value from. I think if you start out that way, if you're starting in anything and you can find a way to educate people on things you've done, I think that's the best way. You can't really be going out there and trying to fake something that you haven't really done. You know, I'm not going to go make episodes on things that I don't know a great deal about. Of course, I can educate myself on them, but at the end of the day, that's going to become draining to educate myself on something that's not helping me. So it's scratching my own itch in that way of these are things that are interesting me and things that I've gone through before. So I've learnt all these things and then I'm teaching about them. I'm not trying to teach something that I haven't done before, and I don't think anyone would be in a right position to do that if you've never gone through it before. So I think that was the unique perspective that I had, in that I just wanted to be able to educate other people. I think in my own businesses as well, like coming up with creative ideas, this is really what I wanted to speak about today, because creative ideas are something that every business owner has to deal with, and you have to be able to come up with ideas. It's not always that you need to come up with brand new ideas, but you need to have some sort of idea of what you're going to plan your content around. You know, most of us start out in a career where we think we are going to be artists, we think we're going to be photographers, we think we're going to be writers, we think we're going to go build a brand around a product. But at the end of the day, we end up becoming full-time content creators, because we've got to keep feeding this machine and keep creating content to get out there in the world to be seen by other people. So we need to have ideas. That's important to get ideas out there. I think that's been really one of the big things for me, is making sure that I'm staying relevant and making sure I'm getting enough content out there in the world to entertain other people and interest other people, educate other people, no matter what way you see that. As I said in the beginning, I don't always think that using other people's ideas is the best way to go about it, but it can definitely lead somewhere. You know, we've seen a lot on Instagram Reels or on TikTok. A lot of people are using other people's ideas, using other people's music, using other people's exact style of video, and that is really working for them. I think there's no harm in repurposing something if that then grows you into your own brand. You're probably not going to be uber successful in that. You're not going to be known as the person who does that one thing, because so many people out there are doing that thing. So you're probably going to be fairly average in it, but it will lead you somewhere. It's a good starting point. I think that's important, to be out there and actually doing things in order to get that momentum flowing. It can be very hard if you're going to turn up on Instagram and you're going to be recording stories of yourself, to really know what to talk about. So if you're going to use other people for inspiration for that and hear what they're speaking about on their day-to-day, so then that's one less thing you have to think about because you're already so stressed about being on camera. I think that's okay. I think that's all right to turn up in that position and allow yourself to be vulnerable, but don't overexert yourself to the point where you're stressing too much about what the content's going to be about that you're not actually making anything. So turning up in the first place is the first hurdle to jump over. And if that is only done through using other people's ideas, then I think that's okay. I think that's all right to turn up in that way. The same way as early on in my career as a photographer, I was using inspiration from a lot of other people. I would see someone take a photo like this and I would try and emulate it. I would try and go and take the exact same photo. I'm not claiming that I have credit over that photo. I'm not claiming that it's a brand new idea. But in that process, I'm learning a lot of things, especially in landscape photography. A lot of people have sort of taken the same type of photo before. So if you're going to go take a photo of a landmark, a lot of people have probably done that before. So if you can try to do what other people are doing and use them as inspiration, because there are rules we need to use. And I think in the beginning, that's okay. If you're using other people's work to get creative in your own work, that then leads you into a position where you can create your own style and your own brand around something that you do. And I think that allows you to then pivot off further down the track. If you did want to go the other way though, I think one of the better things you can do is gain inspiration from people outside your own medium. So for me, I spoke about in the start about this podcast, I'm not out there listening to other people's podcasts and using their podcast titles for ideas for my episodes. I'm not speaking about things that they're speaking about. So I'm using inspiration from other places. I spoke about on last week's episode, I went to the barbershop and that inspired me to make an episode about leading client referrals and having some sort of branding. So drawing inspiration from other places in the outside world. I really love to draw inspiration from reading books. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be using the exact idea of the book, but you can sort of learn things through that book and think, oh, I could implement that. They're not exactly talking about the field that I'm in, but how can I repurpose that? How can I reframe that in a way that's going to help someone else? How can I reframe that in a way that is going to educate my audience in a way that only I can do, in a way that they know how I can turn up it's in my style. If I have that style of turning up on TikTok every single day and making a new video about something in the world, if I hear something, if I read something in a book, how can I repurpose that into a short 15-second video? How can I take a whole chapter from a book and repurpose that into a 15-second video? Because that is my style and that is what I do. That is the thing that everyone turns up here to see me do each week. So how can I then purpose that down? You may be using an idea, and I think that's okay. I think no one in the world has brand new ideas on any different thing. They've all taken inspiration from a bunch of different areas. So you can use things as much as you want, but you're repurposing it to use in your own style. So for me, like most of the things I talk about on this podcast are probably things that I've heard in books, are probably things that I've heard, on YouTube by talking to other people in real life, by talking to other people in business, experiences that I've had in my own business. I know I talk about that a lot, but those are things that I know are important. I know that they're going to be helpful for other people. So using inspiration from outside of your own medium. In the past few months, one of the things that I've been struggling with is my actual photography and knowing what my style is in photography and trying to hone down my style, and not particularly the style of how I actually take photos, but how I edit my photos. So trying to tweak the different colors on my photos. So that has been one of the big things that I've been struggling with in my own style. So rather than gaining inspiration from other photographers in my area who are on Instagram, I'm trying to go through and look at like screen grabs from movies and see how they grade their images in a movie, because I know that is a very appealing way to grade an image, to make the different colors in an image stand out, and how do they compose their shots in an image? How do the best people do it in that area? And then how can we bring that into my wedding photography? How can I bring that into my photography and use that style, use something that I already enjoy and something that I know other people enjoy? How can I then bring that into my style and use that as a little bit of inspiration? I'm obviously not going to do the exact same thing, and I never will be able to do the exact same thing. I think that's the point. But using that as inspiration rather than the person who's also a wedding photographer up the road whose style I really like, rather than emulating them, because if I really like their work, why wouldn't someone else just go to them to go get their work done? I'm using something that's outside my medium, so I'm not really copying, but in that way, I'm going to be creating my own thing in my niche, because I know people turn up to see my wedding photography, and if I can incorporate that into that, I've repurposed something into the thing that I do best. And it's all about that. I think that's so important in every aspect. It's not just the creative aspects of the things you're actually working on in your business, your actual product, your service. I think it's in marketing as well. It's in how you turn up on Instagram. You can sort of see how other people engage. You can have a look at advertising in magazines. You can look at advertising on a billboard on the side of the road and think, what did they do well that drew my attention in? And how can I use that in my own business? It's about being aware of your outside surroundings and knowing what parts you can use and what parts you can't. And so really when it comes down to ideas, it's great to have all these ideas. It's great to be able to take from different places, but what can we do when we have these ideas? We'll often have bursts of creativity. We'll have bursts of all these ideas just flood in at once, and then we'll have a few weeks where we don't have any ideas at all. All of us have been in that position where we're just stuck for a few weeks because we haven't really gained any inspiration. We're in lockdown, we're inside, we haven't actually seen anything, spoke to anyone, and so inspiration's drying up. But what can we do in those times? I think it's important to make a list of things that have inspired you before. Make a list of ideas, make a list of creative ideas that you can go back and work on. It's important to be able to get started on those, but it's important to also have a list because you will go through these ebbs and flows of creativity and you'll often get hit with 3 ideas in one day, and obviously you can't execute on all those, so it's good to be able to write them down. I know for myself with this podcast, I'm writing down constantly ideas that I have for episodes. Early in the week, I can think about what do I want to record this week and what do I want to speak about, which one really impacts me and inspires me to speak on this week. Because just because you had an idea doesn't mean you need to make an episode on it. You don't need to make a piece of content around that just because you had an idea on it. But it's important to have that written down somewhere so that you can go back on it. You may not feel inspired to make that piece of content for another month, for another 2 months. But when that strikes, it's there. You're constantly reminded of it because you've taken a note of it, you've written it down somewhere, and you can then come back to it later on. Seriously important for taking inspiration from the outside world. If you're away on a holiday and you see something that you think, oh wow, that was a really nice interaction between that person, and I really want to speak on that on my Instagram account. I want to really make a caption about that and how that person interacted with another human being that I haven't seen before, or about how that way that person did something when I was out taking their photos on the weekend, and I really want to talk about that in a blog post. I'm not going to think about that on the day that I sit down to write a blog post. The idea is not going to come to me there about that specific thing. It may come to me about something else, but if I haven't written that down somewhere, it's going to be very hard to go back on. So I'm a big believer in writing things down. I'm a big believer in having that sort of journal and outlining all these ideas and having a list that you can then go back on and easily access. I like to use it on my phone and actually write down ideas for episodes of my podcast, write down ideas for things I want to post about on Instagram, ideas for my blog posts, for my website, all these different things. So then when the day comes that I can sit down on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, record an episode, write a blog post, ideas are there. I don't need to come up with ideas on the spot. I've actually written them down through the week. And it's a good way to get them out of my memory as well, because I can write a little blurb about it. I can write what I'm exactly thinking about and then come back to it later on. So it's not taking up mental energy for the whole day of me thinking, geez, I need to go and record this episode right now, otherwise I'm going to lose the idea. Because I don't think you do. I think the ideas come, and if you're really inspired to make it, if you're really inspired to talk about it, and this comes back on to what I was talking about at the start, that we need to be able to scratch our own itch in that way, to be able to make things that we would inherently enjoy. If you're going to make something that you're not crash hot about, then it's going to be really hard for you to keep making content around that type of thing. It's going to be really hard for you to keep speaking about that type of thing that you're not that interested in anyway. So important to be scratching our own itch in that way. And when we write down these ideas, probably we still will have that inspiration when we come back to it in a few days' time, in a few weeks' time. And we will still be able to be as impactful with that, but we wouldn't have been able to get to that place if we hadn't have written those ideas down. It's amazing how if you act on an idea, that will then bring about more ideas. So if you get in one of those ruts where you're not coming up with any creative ideas and you have a look back through your book and you think, oh, I had these few ideas, but I'm not super inspired on any of them, but you need to be able to do something, I think important to just start on any of them. That doesn't necessarily have to be the end product. I could record this episode of the podcast. I could get to the end of it and think, I didn't really enjoy that episode, but I'm now inspired to go do something else. I'm now inspired to go create another episode that I didn't even think about before, but through the process of making that, I've now come up with a different idea. It's the same in any art form. If you're struggling to find inspiration, if you're struggling to find creativity, just could go out there and make something, could go out there and take a photo of something, go out there and record a song, go out there and write a blog post about something, because then that will lead you to write something else, because you'll have an idea through that process. It's that process of creating that leads to creativity. I don't think any of us are born creative. I think we just get to that point through recurring and repeating and practicing over time. So if we're not going to practice, if we're not going to go out and do things, even when we don't feel like doing them, even when we're not inspired to go and do them, then we're never going to get inspiration. So it's that recurring cycle of, if you're not inspired, then you're never going to get inspiration. And you need to be able to go and do things to get inspiration and to get ideas from other parts of the world. If you're at home and you're not inspired to go do anything, well, then you need to go out to get inspiration to go and do things. You're not going to get inspiration in your lounge room if you're struggling to find creative ideas already. At the end of the day, I think being able to come up with creative ideas is hard. It's not an easy thing, but it's going to be harder if your ear's not attuned to it, if your mind's not in a position to think about those things in that way. Anything can be a creative idea. Any idea that you have can be turned into something that you could make a piece of artwork around. Any idea that I think about, if I'm thinking about it, then it's probably worth making an episode on. If I'm thinking about it, it's probably worth talking about on Instagram. If I'm thinking about it, it's probably worth making an art piece around. Anything that we can be thinking about is worth making something about. It's just being attuned to hearing those things. It's being attuned to hearing things in conversation. It's being in tune to hearing your own ideas and thoughts. And most of the time you will actually have ideas. You just may be too nervous to act on them. You may be too scared to actually implement them. You may have the most creative idea ever, but you're too scared to implement it. Well, then that's never going to be an idea. So we have to get out there and make things. We have to get out there and make things that we're happy with, that we think are good, that we think are interesting. And in turn, other people will find that interesting. So that's all I've ever done for me. And that's the only way that I've ever come up with ideas for anything, is just by trying to do the things that I really enjoy and trying to do the things that I find interesting, because at the end of the day, I know that if I'm interested in it, then other people will be as well. And I think that's the main takeaway from this episode, guys. If you can have an idea and you can actually write that idea down and then implement that idea, you are going to go so much further than anyone else who doesn't take that time to write down those ideas and actually implement them, because so many people will have great ideas, but if they're never out there in the world, then they can't be there to be judged by other people. And if they're not able to be judged, then they're not able to be enjoyed by other people. They're not able to be liked. They're not able to get success from those things if they're not going to put them out there to be judged. So that is all that I really wanted to speak on today, guys. A little bit of a shorter episode, but I think it was a good point that I really wanted to drive home today, and something that I really wanted to speak about. As I said in the beginning, new podcast coming out. I'll leave a link to that in the description of the podcast down below. I will still be recording episodes of this podcast. Don't worry about that. Still going to be coming out every single Monday. So if you guys have been enjoying this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a rating or review over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you have been listening to the podcast. I've been getting a steady stream of new listeners over the past couple of weeks, ever since moving my podcast hosting over. I can see that a few new people have come over and listened to episodes of the podcast, which is really nice, and really nice to have new listeners on, especially as we are still going strong. Episode 53, moving into February, over a year of this podcast, and it's been really enjoyable to create. So I hope you guys have been enjoying it as much as me. I hope you all have a great week. I hope you had a great January and are moving through in those goals into February, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.